Welcome to Therapist Uncensored, a podcast where therapists freely speak their minds about real-life matters.
Tina Payne Bryson is a 2 times New York Times best-selling author and nationally recognized child development specialist and psychotherapist. We are so excited that you came back for a second round. For those listeners who missed the first one, we're going to link the first episode, which was really fun and exciting. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I always love getting to talk to you. You and I could do hours and hours and hours, I'm sure. So I'm so excited to be back to chat a little bit more.
That's true. And actually, you're going to be in Austin soon, November 4th. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm going to be giving a talk, I think on the 3rd, the evening before, for parents and community members, and then all day on the 4th for professionals. And I'll be talking about interpersonal neurobiology and application to our lives, whether that's personal or professional. So I'm really excited to come and join with my people, my interpersonal neurobiology folks.
That's right. Austin has a very large IPNB group, thanks to this group, Austin in Connection. So all of the local listeners and anybody actually regionally, come see Tina. It's going to be totally worth it. She's a blast to see live and in person. So speaking of that, what is your interest these days? What are some of the things you've been thinking about and would like to share with our audience?
Gosh, I wish I had more time to read more, because I just feel like information comes faster than I can even get close to digesting. But what I'm really interested in right now, it's really, really fun, because I have this interdisciplinary team, a clinical practice that I formed in the last 2 years. It's called the Center for Connection. And I discovered this, or decided I wanted to do an interdisciplinary clinical practice, because as a clinician, I was having, these moments with clients where, I was trying everything I'd been kind of trained to do, and it just felt like it was falling flat, or I was feeling like, gosh, if I really want to peel back the layers to find out. Well, let me give an example. So let's say I'd have like a 10-year-old little girl that was having panic attacks frequently, and I knew to kind of look to, if there was trauma history, if there was family history of anxiety, if there was some, discrepancy in, the demands of her environment versus her capacities, to look at attachment histories, all of these things. And as I started doing that, I kind of was like, okay, well, what her anxiety, what her panic attacks are about states of hyperarousal. And I had been learning about Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, and so I was kind of thinking about how she was kind of going into these states of hyperarousal where she would have shifts in her physiology and all of these things. And so, but then I was like, but why? Like, what is can we really peel back the layers for this? So as I began to do that in deeper and deeper ways, like I'd get to a new, now I've found, that what's really going on here is she has some sensory things going on, and that's a huge contributor to what's going on. Or I would discover, there was this massive attachment loss in infancy, or, all these different things. The more I kept going, the more I was like, there's more I'm missing. And so I started realizing that I needed, if I was going to really peel back the layers to find out the why, to really chase the why, so that I would know where the targeted intervention would be most effective, I pulled together this team. So I have occupational therapists and educational therapists, speech and language pathologists, neuropsychologists, and then lots of mental health people who have expertise all across the lifespan and in different areas. And, what's really cool is we sit together for 2 hours every week, and we really wrestle with these cases. And we have a lot of cases that are uber complex, and it's hard to figure out where to start. There are medical things going on and sensory things going on, and they might also have learning disabilities and trauma histories, et cetera. And what we've been doing that's so interesting is to, just when we think, okay, the reason I'm going to be, talking about a case when I come to Austin, it was a case of this child that was super dysregulated, young child. And, when we did a full evaluation, we found that this kid had a learning challenge. And we thought, okay, that explains, a lot of why he's reactive. So we'll have an educational therapist work with him, and we'll work with the school, et cetera. But that wasn't even the whole picture. So then we also had a clinician who had been training with Bruce Perry in the NMT model. So she did this whole assessment on regulation from the bottom up and where the breakdowns were. And I think I get so excited right now about constantly being in a place of not knowing and being hungry to know. And so then I learn something new, and then I start seeing everything through that lens too. So that was a really long answer to the bottom line is I'm more and more interested in everything kind of coming back to regulation and coming back to the idea that bottom up and across, meaning like relational, is more and more important the more I learn about everything.
That is so funny because that is exactly, we are in such synchrony that I, even with cases, with adult cases, it's the same thing. The more I learn about it, the more I can almost just even kind of visualize what's going on neurologically. And I think the better that we're able to convey that to folks so that like in any given moment, what state that you're in, and if you can know what to do about it, or your partner's state, if you see them begin to dysregulate, that, we can really break this down. And actually, it's just super exciting to be able to help people learn it and know what to do. And we must be onto something. And I think there's these different little nodules of people studying this stuff, and we kind of keep coming. I don't think it's reductionistic. I actually think we're getting to the core of something really important.
I do too. And I just have to say, two huge, I've studied with Dan Siegel forever, and we've written these books together, and we have another one coming out in January called The Yes Brain that we're really excited about. And then we have another book coming out after that. We don't know the date yet. That's all about the science of attachment. And that one will be called Showing Up. So I studied with Dan for a really long time, but I want to say too that two huge influences on how I'm thinking and rethinking what I've quote unquote known as a clinician and as a parent and partner is Bessel van der Kolk's work, and especially his book, The Body Keeps the Score, and Pat Ogden's work and the sensory motor psychotherapy, and then Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory. I think the three of those kind of approaches have just completely taken me down a different road, especially different from most of my training that was so top down and so much about talk and insight and all of that, which kind of, it leads me to rethink and wonder. I guess I'm doing a lot of wondering. Like, we've known for a long time from the research that regardless of what your attachment histories have been, that the one of the most important predictors for how we function is not so much what has happened to us or the kinds of attachment histories we have, but whether or not we've reflected on them and made sense of them. So I think, my whole professional career, I've worked with parents, and I've shared, that research with many, many audiences to talk about, it's really about reflecting and creating this coherent narrative so that you have awareness and that you understand how these experiences have wired your brain. But I think, Sue, that I've forgotten in all those years of thinking that and doing that the brain is embodied. And so I've sort of, really talking about creating a coherent narrative, that's a very prefrontal kind of experience. And it's very much a top-down thing. But the truth is, based on what I know now and the more and more that I read, and I don't know that the research has captured this fully yet, is that I need to be able to have a coherent, making sense state in my body before I can ever get to that. So, the idea of reflection and using my prefrontal cortex, that is so much the cart before the horse if we can't be in states of regulation. So I feel like the first thing we need to do when we're talking about repairing our attachment histories is to really think about the vagus nerve and the brainstem and the diencephalon and the limbic system and these more subcortical structures and doing some work there.
Yes.
As clinicians, we're going to do that mostly relationally, but we can't get to the making sense process. And I think for a long time we've taken that research and we've said, okay, well, if we help the people remember and we help, we'll make them feel safe as they do that, but we'll help them tell their stories. And once they've told their story and they've made sense of it, then they can have new attachment relationships. And I just think that's in a way oversimplistic, and it's missing the horse.
No, I totally get it. It makes me also think of the work of Alan Shore of this bottom-up sort of right forward. And so let me give you an example so that we can make this more concrete for folks, if that's okay, for you to respond to that as a parenting example that I can imagine many of the parents that are listening might relate to, which is that if I were asked on a test, like what the right answer is about how to respond to, say, a temper tantrum or a teenager pushing boundaries, most of us are pretty good at knowing what we're supposed to do. Most, not everybody, but most, I would say a large portion would kind of know generally what to do. But when it comes down to it, sometimes we just don't do it at all, right? When we're live and in vivo. And this is exactly what you're talking about. It's more brainstem. We've lost our cortical functioning and we are playing out something else. So I thought maybe we could break that down a little bit more of why is it that we might know what to do with our partners or with our kids, but absolutely in the heat of the moment, not do it.
I love that you went there because, even little kids, I had a 6-year-old tell me at school a couple of weeks ago, he said, I know that I am safe at school. I already know that, but I don't really feel safe. So even a 6-year-old knows that there's a difference between what we know and what we feel, right? And
yes,
so
definitely.
The bottom line, and I think about this all the time, I use this example with audiences sometimes is, we all remember being afraid as children, afraid of the dark, afraid of monsters, that kind of thing. And even though we knew our parents were in the house and we knew we were safe in our house and our parents would say, you're perfectly safe, there's no such thing as ghosts and monsters. That was all information we knew, but it didn't make us not feel afraid, right? And so right. Here's what this all comes down to is this basic foundational principle in interpersonal neurobiology of integration. And and you're right, Alan Shore is an amazing person to think about how all of this comes together because stuff that we know, factual memory or, facts, details that we know are often in the left hemisphere. The stuff we would write down on the test, so to speak, would be more left hemisphere. But right hemisphere is taking in more information from the body and the more procedural memory and those kinds of things. And so, when those two sides are integrated, there's a flow of energy and information between them. And what we know and how we feel can be connected. But when emotions run high, we lose the ability for that information flow to be as present. And that can so that's left and right integration, but we can talk about this in terms of more vertical integration too, that, we know we're not supposed to scream, I hate you too, back to our child when they have screamed at you, I hate you, or whatever it is. But when our bodies and our subcortical lower structures of the brain go into reactivity, the processing of information happens so much faster, as you know, than in our cortex. And so it's faster, it takes over. And so we lose the ability to be rational and to calm ourselves unless we can do a little bit of a kind of an override of that higher brain system to even just for a second to tell us to pause before we react, like I'm going to pause. Right. To give our brain a second, our cortex a second to be able to weigh in because it's so slow.
Well, there's a cheat maybe that we could do too, is like if we even break it down further about if we think about our own parents. So for example, if I know that I tend to, or that my parents were more cool or just, the pull yourself up by the bootstraps, that sort of the audience will recognize kind of on the rub some dirt on it, I'll give you something to cry about, that side of things, then where we might lean in our own periods when we're not doing our best might be in that same direction. So we might, when we lose empathy, because, when you're in a more dismissive state, you actually don't know that you are, right? We think we're fine and other people are crazy.
That state is very much about being annoyed by someone else's demands and needs that are clearly crazy, right? That are clearly over the top. Yeah.
Right. So a crying child could easily then, begin to trigger us to move more to what is actually dysregulated, but we think it's not dysregulated.
Yeah, it is. It tricks us. It absolutely tricks us. And I know that state of mind well. That is one that I can go to and that I've had to work on. Yeah. And I know that when I'm in that state and I feel exasperated by someone's demand or need that I think is ridiculous, it's almost the opposite of empathy. It's completely counter to empathy, and it's really hard for me to get to empathy in that state. And you're right, the trick of that one's really tricky, because like when you go more kind of hot and crazy, you kind of have a sense
at least you know you're
right. But this other one's really tricky because you feel like you're totally in control, and you feel like, you know, you can justify it. You're actually going so left that you can kind of, you know, come up with a really rational argument as to why you're right to respond.
Right, and you might even be under-responsive to your child's particularly negative expression, thinking that you're helping them. Like it actually might be, you know, I don't want to grow a crybaby, so I better really teach them that they really need to have something to cry about. You know, I mean...
Yeah, for sure. And the culture reinforces that. I mean, that's what a lot of parenting approaches and approaches in schools and all kinds of things are about, is that, you know, we're supposed to ignore tantrums, and we're supposed to, you know, give them grit by making sure they're not spoiled and making sure that we're not indulging them or giving the one that I hear a lot is like, you don't want to give them attention. You don't want to reinforce that behavior
because they're just looking for attention. So, like, we wouldn't want to give that to them.
No, how terrible that would be. Yeah, and you know, I mean, the argument I make about that is that, you know, attention is as much a need as is food, water, and sleep. Because if you don't have an adult's attention on you, the lion might eat you, and no one will notice, right? And and so if it's a need, if you are ignored, if it's not responded to, then in order to get your need met, you have to go with even bigger behaviors. So then the parents are like, well, I'm not going to reinforce that negative behavior, so I'm going to ignore them. And it becomes this cycle. Whereas if parents would just lean into it and say, it looks like you're wanting to show this to me, are you needing some time with me, or let's read a book together, or, you know, whatever, often that kind of satiates the need, and then you don't have the same kind of acting out behaviors. But yeah, the culture and around how we're supposed to handle or control children's behavior very much is that avoidant, dismissing approach.
Right. And so that's some of it is like, if we can, this is sort of the cheat part, is if parents, we can really think of our history and know that we might lean in that direction when we get stressed, that it might help us like be able to make that correction. And then the same on the other side, right? That if the bottom up is that when under stress, we feel abandoned, or I'm actually thinking about parenting with teens and how teens have to push away, and how that can be triggering kind of on the other side of things or abandonment, or, you know, being able to be differentiated or say no. You know, again, this is just if the audience, if you think about your own parenting and the way you were parented, I mean, and were you supported in separating and emancipating with your own folks? And if that's the case, great, it's going to come easier for you. But if it was more rocky, then that might be it might be a vulnerable area for you in your own parenting. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's childhood from, you know, toddler years all the way through is very much kind of an unfolding of that differentiation and how to navigate that linkage too. And, you know, just like you were talking about in the adolescent years, you know, the toddler years are also, toddler and preschool years are also very much about, you know, differentiating in the mine and not you, and,
that's
you
right.
know, no, and all that.
That's right. It's all treacherous. It's all treacherous and really common for, you know, a child to prefer one parent over the other and to say, not you, I want mommy, or, you know, whatever. And so I think you're right. And so what can happen is we may have vulnerabilities in those areas where we feel not seen. We might feel like this, you know, we have someone who's going to be unpredictable in terms of whether or not they're going to meet our needs, right? And so it can activate us. And I think you're right. The key is knowing where our vulnerabilities lie. That's the coherent narrative part, is to say, okay, I know that given, and I'll just speak for myself, you know, I had a mother who, both my parents were very young when I was born, but I had a mother who was wonderful in terms of providing secure attachment and was predictable, and she lit up when we walked into the room and all of that. But we had a dad who was very much a dismissing approach to relationships, and I can trace that back. You know, I did a little bit of, when I first learned about the adult attachment interview and I threw out some questions at the family dinner table, I was like, oh my gosh, this is textbook, and I could trace it back generations.
But I know that for myself as a partner in a marriage and as a mom and as a daughter who has, parents with vulnerabilities at times because of aging and all that kind of thing, I can easily go into, left brain approach where I just am all about solving the problems and just getting the things done and not really tuning into being present, right, where I'm not present. But I can also, I have a child with chronic health issues, and I've struggled with chronic health issues. And so, I feel a little worn out by my own struggle with that. And so when I have my son is in pain or he's not feeling well, it's really easy for me to do that kind of rub some dirt on it, like you're just going to have to push through. And sometimes that's appropriate, but not without a conscious decision to also be present to what's happening, right?
Absolutely. And would you mind, we had been talking offline about exactly these things, our vulnerabilities, and even with all of the work that we do and that we can turn around and teach it. And, I have a similar background, so I know the rub the dirt on it for sure. But around, particularly when things happen with our own parents, and so we might have done our own therapy or through healthy relationships and through our own body work have resolved a whole lot of things, but there can be moments of real vulnerability. So is that anything you would care to speak to?
Yeah, I remember one of the first times I was in Dan Siegel's study group, and I was teaching his book, Parenting from the Inside Out with Mary Hartzell, had just come out, and it's such a beautiful book to help us kind of walk through how our brains have been wired and where our vulnerabilities are. So I still love the book, but I was teaching a Parenting from the Inside Out class, and we were in someone's home, and after the first session, I was saying goodbye to people, and I noticed one woman hanging back, and she was crying, and I said, "Oh my goodness, what's going on?" And she said, "Damn it." And I said, what's happening? And she said, "I've already done therapy. I've already been through all of this."
Yes.
Now, and it was like, oh, it's not one and done, and there was sort of this moment of like, dang, I already kind of did my work. Well, I think it's very much ongoing. And as things in life, the brain and the body are such association machines, right? So even though we've kind of reflected on things, we are constantly new people in new environments, but with old wiring, right? So what happens is, new things can happen. Like you said, your kids become teenagers and they start to pull away, and that's a new thing that you hadn't experienced for 5 years or whatever. So I know I shared with you personally, my dad died unexpectedly this last year at age 64. Yes. And thank you. It's been, and we're, I'm just a couple of weeks away from the memorial service. So, I don't know that I have a full coherent narrative about, his loss and how that fits into kind of the arc of the relationship and all that. But I'm working through new things now in response to that, where I remember when I first learned about attachment science, and it was so liberating to me at that moment in time because my dad was very much the kind of guy who was really fun to be around, and he could join with people as long as he wasn't looking at them face to face and having an in-depth conversation, right? Intimacy was not something he was comfortable with. So he'd be cooking in the kitchen and there'd be other things going on, and he'd be fine for a few hours, but then he couldn't handle too much closeness and connection. And and so I remember when I learned about this attachment stuff, and I went, oh, it's not me. It's that his brain has been wired in that way, right? That he grew up with parents who were dismissing, and he has a dismissing wired brain. And so he doesn't know how to show up for me. He doesn't know, his brain is not capable at this point in time. And I think, one of the sad things that happens with death is that there's no more chance to have a shift in the relationship, right? So there's grief and loss around not just the loss of him and him not being, around in life and missing out on things, but also grief around, what I didn't get that I wish I had had, and what he didn't get from his parents, and how he wasn't able to kind of show up in that way for his grandkids. And so there's all this kind of lost opportunity and grieving around all of that. So, there's always new stuff that gets activated.
I so appreciate you sharing that. It is, it's it's so wonderful to kind of have models that we can know this stuff so deeply and still have so much to learn. And in particular, with the grief and then the loss, being able to feel and see him as a whole person. But also this is kind of, I think, where you're going, is that you can maybe feel your own grief in ways of what you missed as some of these events happen, which is part of I think what you were talking about at the beginning about the bottom-up healing, to get that, because part of the whole thing about the more dismissive side is that we just bypass what we need. And so that's kind of how I'm hearing what you're saying, is there's a chance for you, not just you, all of us, to be able to go back and feel what it was that we had to make ourselves not feel, that we sort of bypassed.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, that's such a tendency of mine, is to kind of go, to that place. And I think, for me, the grief experience, and now it's been 10 months, has been fascinating. And this also shows my vulnerability here, is that I can easily kind of talk about, this is the process of grief has been very interesting from a neurobiological, neuropsychological perspective, and I can talk about it in a very left brain, top-down way about the neurophysiological changes that happened while I was grieving, and all that's super interesting, but it can keep me from being present to my grief, right? And it can keep me from all of that. But, I remember, people were lovely and sent me lots of cards and things like that right after my dad passed, and it was really interesting. And obviously, we could actually do a whole attachment classification system based on the kinds of notes people write when you lose someone, because some of the notes and responses were awful, and some of them were amazing.
Well, what was awful? What was awful and what was amazing? As far as I don't mean like calling anybody out, but just what was amiss?
I can hide identities. My very favorite was from actually a colleague of mine. I'll even say her name because it was so good. Dr. Mona Delahook, who is definitely in our IPN community, and she writes this amazing blog about kids with disabilities and showing up for their parents and all that. Anyway, but she sent me flowers, and on the card, all she wrote was, "Just reminding you how much you are loved."
Oh, yeah.
And it was so beautiful, because it was like, this is like this moment of devastation and heartbreak for me. And it wasn't like, the bad things, which were like, at least you have a lot of people to love you, or something like that. They wouldn't have felt the same, right? And I think, the bad responses were ones where people were like, I really want to hear how you're doing. Can you please get back with me? Right. It's like it was about their need. Right.
Right. Oh, I totally know what you mean.
Yeah. Or the ones that are like, at least it was for, I'm sure God has a plan and purpose for this, or, those kinds of things that were just really like things that were about them, making them feel better, to save them. It really was not holding me in mind. But, one thing someone said to me that was really interesting, and I can't even remember who it was. It might have even been someone just that I didn't know very well. But someone said, get ready for a new relationship with your dad. And at the time, I thought it was kind of an odd statement. And I was kind of like, I don't want a new relationship with my dad. Like, I want him here. You know what I mean? Like, it was kind of a little off-putting at first. Right. But I think about that statement a lot, because, this goes back to what you were just saying about how when you have a new experience, it can kind of open things up and help you see and feel and experience things you didn't have. And what's been really interesting, my dad was, fairly not present in my life, especially at different times. He would disappear for periods. We wouldn't hear back from him. He wasn't very responsive, even though he lived, fairly close. And in this grief process, I feel like I think about him every day. He is more present to me now than he was when he was alive. And so that's really interesting, because it allows me to go, oh my gosh, like I never had that. Even, when he was alive, it wasn't like we had the kind of connection that felt like it was present within me all the time. And so that's the work I have to do now, to be like, oh, that's what I couldn't hold him in my mind because he wasn't a secure person for me. But now in his death, the memories and the missing him and all of that is very much a part of my daily landscape. And it's painful, but it's really nice too.
Oh, totally. And, I'm so touched by what you're saying, and the opportunity to there's this saying now, it's never too late to have a happy childhood, that we can use our minds. Like, I was even imagining him giving you more and being more responsive and really being able to do reparative work for this younger part. And that's certainly the direction that people are doing now in therapy, is like, no, we get to re-envision with an ideal parent and really actually give our young selves a more full-bodied experience of what we actually needed.
And I think, I couldn't have said this the first 6 months. I think I'm kind of on the other side of that, really kind of like my nervous system was absolutely in a trauma state. I had a hyper reflex to everything. I would hear a noise and I would jump, and I experienced anxiety like I never had before. I would wake up anxious in the morning, like from sleep. My brain was working on it. And so I was definitely in this kind of hyper arousal down to hypo arousal kind of swing. And there were all kinds of, just even the way my processing speed slowed down, my attention was funky. I felt like I probably shouldn't have even driven for the first couple of weeks because my brain was just operating so differently. But now that I'm kind of on the other side of that, what I think is so interesting now as I reflect is that I feel like the experience of loss, and I know lots of people have had loss, I'm 46. I was 45 when my dad died, and so I'm kind of late in life to have this first experience of this kind of a devastating loss. But I feel like it completely opened things up in new ways in my life. It opened things up in new ways in my marriage that allowed me to be vulnerable at a time when I needed to be more vulnerable. It allowed me to really have a bodily felt sense of what loss is and what kind of that state of hyper-vigilance threat response is, and how even though I knew, like I remember talking to my therapist and I said, I know all the strategies to regulate my nervous system. I know them all. I've taught them. I've written about them, and they're not working. And she said, they will. They will. You're in this moment of, really intense loss, and they will. But, she really was just encouraging me to be just really gentle with myself and to really do the things that I had been talking about. In most ways, the top-down things did not work for me at that time. Now they do, because I'm not in the gulf of it. But I think that, just really like what I found worked really well for me was going and walking outside, just being outside, not listening to anything, not talking to anyone, just walking and being outside. So moving my body helped a lot. And just doing really gentle, very short meditation kinds of things, just paying attention to my breath, and petting dogs helped me a lot. Those kinds of things that were much more kind of giving my whole system the space to be like, you're in pain and you're totally safe. Somebody's got you. Lots of people have got you, and you're going to be okay. And so I think that, it obviously not to wish for his loss at all, but it has been an incredible gift for me to open up new areas of work, personally, new areas of things to dig into, but also new ways to see and feel with people, and to become a better problem solver in terms of saying, okay, sometimes the problem solving stuff isn't always the best thing. It's really more of the bottom up body stuff and about the connection. And I think that's, one other thing that's really kind of blowing my mind is that still, and this is to bring it back to the attachment stuff, even if I don't know what to do with a client or with my kids or whatever, is that if I really focus on connection and being present with someone, or having someone be present with me, that is bottom up. Relationship is bottom up. It's about co-regulating and having someone else just being present to let your whole nervous system feel somebody's here, I'm going to be okay, I'm not alone in this. And that, more than anything, is what allows our systems to rewire for that secure attachment, is to have those bodily felt sense states of connection, regulation, and attachment. And that's how we're wired.
Wow, I can't. You just said that so perfectly. I am so touched. You said relationship is bottom up. And that defies, because I come from the avoidance side too, it totally defies everything that our body knew before then, which was that protecting ourselves was, versus like the interpersonal was what was threatening, not in a conscious way, but just implicitly, right? So, oh my gosh, that is so, and I also really love what you said about that if you don't know what to do in any moment, like moving back into presence with yourself and then connecting with someone is just always going to be a good regulatory, safe move to move you closer into a more integrated place.
Yeah. I met with a mother and a daughter last week, and the daughter had gotten in trouble for drinking, and the mom was, worried and was basically like, can you talk to her kind of thing. And so I talked with the daughter for just 20 minutes or so, and I brought the mom into the room, and I basically said, whatever is going on, unless this is an emergency where she's really in danger, this behavior, this particular, drinking when she wasn't supposed to be drinking, let's think of that as a back burner issue. And it's your relationship with each other that's front burner always. And this event that has happened has become front burner, and it's become the whole house. And I think you guys have forgotten, you need to talk to each other, and just facilitating things like, helping the daughter say to her mom, I actually don't even know what your expectations are and if they're even possible for me, and to open up connection between them. And so that's what I often say to parents, to myself, and to my audiences is, if you don't know what to do, you don't even have to know. You can always go back to the 4 S's, where you help yourself or someone else feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. And secure is really about the predictability that someone's going to continue to be there. So that's what can always, get us there. And Sue, you're right. I don't know if your family was like this, but, that idea of relationship being bottom up is not at all how our brains were wired if we grew up in a dismissing, avoidant with a dismissing parent, because the whole relationship is based on top-down left brain interactions. I mean, that's really
right.
What it is. Like, I don't know about you, but like we had like family conversations at dinner. Family dinner conversation was always about the dog or the weather or the neighbors, or there was nothing.
Very concrete.
Yeah, there was nothing about the internal landscape at all. What are your thoughts or wishes, or what did you experience today? And it was all about performance and all the external stuff. And so that's even more why relationships that are providing those 4 S's and that sense of presence and connection, that happens in therapy or between a parent and child or whatever, between best friends or partners, can be so restorative and so healing, along with kind of that awareness that coherent narrative that we were talking about, to have that felt sense of someone's got me, right? And not just the me that, they're looking at my grades and, the funny thing the dog did, but me, my internal world.
That's exactly right. And that's the only way to update. It's almost, the brain being the anticipation machine. So we're just expecting what has always happened. But with these new, whether it be therapy or these losses that open things up, I love how you described that's the chance to do the bottom up again, but in this more reparative. So we've talked about, like you said, coherent narrative, but I like what you're saying. It really has to be an embodied coherence, and where that we feel our way through it. And it's really radical compared to, for those of us that don't come by this naturally and that we have to earn our way towards it. It really is a radical, there can be consciousness in redoing it, but it has to involve the body and the heart to get us all the way there.
And I love it when I have moments myself, or when I have a client come back and talk to me about this, that when you, let's talk about parent-child, when you really have that embodied sense of connection with your child in a moment, where you're really present with them, especially if they're falling apart and having a hard time. And you stay in that green regulated state, and you're present to it, and you're soothing, and you access empathy, and they calm down, and you feel close to your child. Like, when those moments happen, it is so powerful, and it's such a huge radical contrast to the opposite of that, which is, I know as a parent I should listen to my child when they're upset, and so I'm going to stand here and listen to them. Like,
right.
Being present. And I think, there's a lot of fear that if my child's falling apart or they're upset about something, that they're not being grateful because they want popcorn, and I'm taking them to the movies anyway, and now they're spoiled because they also want popcorn. They're having a meltdown about that. And right. if I show up with presents and say, I can see you're really disappointed, you were really hoping popcorn would be part of the deal, that's going, there's a lot of fear that that's going to turn your children into a spoiled child. But what we know when we experience these successes, these moments that feel so right and that regulate us, is to, then you're present. I know you really wanted that popcorn. You're disappointed about that. You had an expectation. You still hold the boundary, right? You don't have to give in. And to say, so then your child feels felt and they feel understood, and then they actually come out of it in a way that their brain moves back into a state of integration, and that gets developed over time. So we really don't have to be afraid that that's doing our children harm by really identifying it and being present to those emotions, even if they're over things that we think are silly or spoiled.
So here's an example in reverse that just adds to this, which is that, so sometimes those of us, again, who didn't come by all this naturally, I was having a moment with my teenager. He was really wanting to do this camp that was much of the summer. He'd mowed lawns and he'd done all these things to try to earn his way to do it. And he really wanted it. It's a big deal, and it's very challenging and hard to get into this, just a debate camp. And so I'm worrying, but, I don't want these people raising you. I want to raise, and all these things. And at the end, I was like, but this is your last summer. This is the last summer. I'm almost in tears. And he's like, Mom, he goes, Mom, you have me for the rest of your life. This isn't the last summer. So there could be these moments when actually the security that we've been able to give to our kids can, or that it can reverse, where it's like, oh yeah, I forget. We're not in crisis here. This is a very normal, good.
He was able to kind of reflect it back.
Exactly. So there is hope for those parents out there that might be listening. We're probably, you know what I mean, that we can get it from all directions, and our kids don't break, and we don't break. And so there's these constant interpersonal opportunities for this rewiring that is exactly what you're talking about and what your books are about. Tina, I think that you are one of the most talented people right now out there being able to translate this you're really good at being able to translate the complexities into these very usable, understandable things for a wider audience. So it's really, really true.
Yeah, it's ongoing work as we continue to move towards integration and healing ourselves. And it's ongoing work to keep trying to be present to the struggles that our world has and the struggles that the clients that show up that are in crisis have. And, I think we're just at a really exciting time because we know so much more and we're able to share it with each other. And that's what it's all about anyway, is connecting with each other and sharing what we know and how we apply it, and which is why these podcasts are so great too, because you're able to kind of share and connect with all kinds of people and share what you know, Sue.
Yeah, that really has been just such a surprise, how much it's taken off. And so for our audience, one of the best ways to learn is to turn around and explain it to someone else. So what we really encourage you to do is to share the podcast, certainly, but also see if you can, to your partner or to your kids, embody some of what Tina Payne Bryson has been sharing with us today around what's important. And it's just a good way to integrate it more deeply in our own bodies, is to turn around and teach it. But in that vein, if you are regional, if you're local, be sure and try to show up for this workshop that's going to happen very soon. Whether you are a therapist or not, this is good for educators, teachers, clients that see parents, clients that see parents, see how we can get it from anywhere. Therapists that see parents, send your clients. A lot of times therapists are a little shy about referring their clients to things, but this is a perfect opportunity it'll actually strengthen your individual work, because not only are we learning about kids, I've sent some patients of mine just even to learn more about attachment and what we're working on as adults in the session. So this is actually a really wide audience here. It's not just for parents. And also, so would you mind sharing your contact information for those who would like to get in touch?
Sure. My website is tinabryson.com, and that's Bryson. And if you're curious about the clinical practice I mentioned, that website is thecenterforconnection.org. So yeah, there's all kinds of ways to connect. And from my tinabryson.com website, there are links to my Facebook and Twitter page. And I like to share a lot of other people's work as well, because I think if we can pull together lots of different ideas and thoughts, we can approach things from a more holistic perspective. And that's really fun to connect across disciplines too.
That's awesome. I totally agree. So thank you very much for listening, and be sure and send us a note and let us know what you think of this. And if you have any other topics that you would like to hear about, we always love to hear from you. And in particular, any rating and reviews, those make a really big difference for us. So thank you. We'll see you around the bend.
Therapist Uncensored is Ann Kelly and Sue Marriott. This podcast is edited by Jack Anderson.